Khans. Nomads under blue sky. It was said that they came from north of Maoyang. Though they may not be the most powerful forces in the realm, they never backed out from a fight. They have been always on the constant migration, moving south to Liangyun and fighting for survival in the borderlands. Now, they come to Astaria after the skirt of winter. They have their eyes set to the northwestern Astaria. In the meanwhile, the Empire of Heaven was fighting Leviathan on the southwest and the Ming Dynasty on the northeast of Astaria. Eternal Order was next to Khans on northwestern Astaria's rule. Khans settled on the corner of the world to avoid the raging war between the major powers. But the war follows everyone eventually. The small village where the Khans have settled were attacked by the Beskar Knights. The battle started on the late morning. As we finished our meal, we saw the enemies marching in. It seemed like the enemies weren't fully prepared. There were only about 8/10 of their forces present. This gave the Khans the advantage to establish their defensive line around the village center. Sir and George, Sir Gunman, and Lady Tenacious held the center as the main infantry, while Sir Sangme, Sir Ice Shadow, and Sir Whiplash, who were the Khan's main cavalry, skirmished on the northern flank. Sir Ichigo and Sir Draudus created the defensive line to guard the southern supply with heavy infantry. Sir Warrior and Sir Bat the Great stayed as reserve to reinforce anywhere that's needed. The enemies weren't prepared, and Khans took advantage of this and pushed the enemies back. However, by noon, the rest of the enemy trickled in with reinforcement. They focused on destroying Khan's cavalry and started to push to the northern plains of the village. Sangme and Khan's cavalry had to fall back to regroup and resupply. Main forces of Beskar Knight were massing on the northern side, so the Khans held the line until the cavalry arrived. It was by sunset when the cavalry returned. At the same time, the enemy started to make their pincer push. This is when I called for main infantry under N. George and Tenacious and gunmen to push against the enemy advance, while stretching the heavy infantry on south to center to hold center of the village with the reserve. As the main infantry pushed to north, Sangme's cavalry arrived at the perfect timing to create the pincer on the northern force. And some enemies pushed into center, however, me and the reserve were able to hold them back. Now, the enemies on the northern plains were getting pincered by cavalry and the main infantry force. The enemies in north were vanquished. Then Khans continued to push the enemies with the momentum on their side, and soon Beskar Knights were driven back. It was a clear victory for Khans. Khans could only enjoy the victory for some time, since northwestern Astaria became the battleground for Leviathan and Eternal Order. I, Lord Asadel, had a relationship with Lord Malicious from Crimson Blade in Eternal Order, and sent out a raven to him to establish an alliance between Eternal Order and the Khans. Unfortunately, Khans have lost their land to Leviathan and decided to migrate from the hot region. The Eternal Order continued to fight and held a line against Leviathan, while Leviathan and Ming Dynasty was fighting against the Empire of Heaven. Ming Dynasty also had two fronts as they were fighting against Ba Sing Se as well. The war raged on, but the Empire still prevailed. Khans have migrated to western Ungaveria to the city of Germa and the surrounding villages, and enjoyed a peace for a short while. Then, the golden wave of Ming Dynasty arrived to Ungaveria. In the city of Germa, the Khan's army prepared for the defense against the Ming. Ming's army was led by none other than King Zelius himself. The fight started fine, with all forces spread out across the city to deter the Ming from capturing the wall. Then Ming forces created a breach on the western wall. Lady Tenacious' heavy infantry created a defensive line, but the Ming army were rushing to the breach with the waves of their cavalry. I ordered for a general retreat to secondary defense, but it was too late. What followed was a slaughter. Ming pushed the Khans out from western Ungaveria, and Khans were forced to migrate to northern Ungaveria, only to find themselves caught in war between the Ming Dynasty and the Empire of Heaven. Things were becoming dire. Khans needed the number to match against these giants, and there wasn't anyone I could call on. Then, I received a message from the old gods of the Republic who founded and left the Republic like me. This could be the reinforcement the Khans needed, but I wasn't sure if the old gods are here to help. As I was preparing a letter to the old gods, I received a raven bearing news. And the news read, the Ming Dynasty just collapsed. Find out on next episode, the fall of Ming Dynasty and Republic, and the realm's answer to the Empire of Heaven, the dawn of Trinity.
Together! Volley fire! All right! Brace yourself! Protect the command wire!